maintain a safe environment for the public resulting in serious harm or fatal incident. Was our intention in that we are talking about council-owned and maintained facilities only, other than, you know, in people's houses and in private settings? I'm not quite sure what I thought when we were doing that we were talking about stuff that we have jurisdiction over, property that we have jurisdiction over.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, so could that be just clearly, I guess, does that need to be clearly, because we are the governing body of the whole city as well, it kind of, to me, it's just not as accurate as it could be? And other people may think it's unnecessary what I'm saying. But.
So, no, I understand your point, Councillor Millett, so I'll note it for the minutes.
Yeah.
This was a briefing note, and
yes.
I understand these will come in a more formal way to the Audit and Risk Committee, so I'll make sure that they're amended in light with the agreement of colleagues, in light of your comments, but we'll record your comments in the minutes.
Thank you.
We have a mover. Councillor James, seconded. Councillor Gary. All those for, any against? Carried. Now we move to item 9, which is the Chair's report on page 77. I'll take the reports as read. Helen's not here from... Oh, sorry. Great. Thank you, Helen. I was looking for you at the back. So I've spoken with Helen, who's looking after that department in Lance's absence. We'd just like to include the words on B, scheduled to be brought to the 19th of October 2007 council meeting or earlier. Just the 2 words, or earlier. So after, on B, on page 78, to be brought to the 19th of October 2017 council meeting, comma, or earlier. Those 2 words in there. So Helen believes she may be ready to bring the report back a month earlier than October. So it may be September that she brings the report back, just depending on her and her team's readiness.
Mayor Andrew, your B is about a deferral, and so now you're saying October or earlier, but you're still trying to defer it? I don't understand how the context of that. Can someone explain that to me?
Well, thank you. Yeah.
So it's currently, there's a resolution to bring it back in August.
Yeah.
I think we said we'd bring it back in August. So we're comfortable, it's actually in our interest to, in terms of the additional option, to make sure we get good information around that. So it's in our interest to...
What's the additional option?
Around option 4, which is the option that the Mayor discussed at the last briefing, which is around pricing the pool and looking at what we would do to address some of the current issues. That needs to be good information, but we would prefer an earlier date of September, so that if our recommendation and or Council's decision is to progress the current recommendation, which is to implement the water world renewal as DB discussed, we'd need to, the latest we would need a decision, and that would be September, so that we could implement it in February. So I'm comfortable with September in terms of still being able to implement a renewal upgrade if necessary.
Okay, so when we get to the item I might talk to that, because there's a process matter about what gets agreed upon in a workshop and what gets agreed around council as a council approves a workload going forward. But thank you, that does help me.
Yes.
I'm wondering if the Chief Executive or someone could assist us with B, because the word is deferral is actually not an accurate description now. It's basically, as I understand it, you're trying to align this report into the 10-year plan process. So we're not talking about deferral at all. It's just a slight realigning of the report process. So, Mr. Governance Manager, could you perhaps assist us on a potential, because deferral is a misleading term?
Well, it was agreed at the briefing that it would come back earlier.
Yeah, so what I'm saying, get rid of that word deferral, and we want to clearly explain that this report is being moved clear and square into the 10-year plan process.
Okay, so democracy is going to have a look at changing the wording to get it where you're comfortable. Meanwhile, we'll keep moving on with the meeting. Questions, Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Andrew. I wonder if you just expand on your last paragraph. You acknowledge there is some risk of failure, however, this needs to be balanced against the entire 10-year plan priority spend. Are you talking about failure of an asset or something? Are you talking about a failure in our ability to balance our books and stuff like that? I'm just not quite too sure what you're alluding to there.
No, it's just the condition of the asset
Okay, so it
the
is.
staff are concerned about, and I'm just acknowledging that as it is being pushed out a couple of months.
So you're saying if we keep pushing it out, there is a chance that the filter system could fail?
Yeah, but
in the interim?
if that happens either way, if we go ahead with the whole job, it's a 6-month shutdown anyway.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
you know.
Yeah, I just wasn't quite sure what you were alluding us to there.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Thank you. Richard, did you want to? No, sorry. No. Councillor Rob.
I'm just reflecting back on the briefing that we had on the 12th of July, and the history around some of the deferred maintenance at the pool. And I did get a sense from that some of the work out there is relatively urgent, and that there is a high risk of failure. I mean, we've got asset management plans and we've got expertise within our staff. And this might be a hard question for you to answer, but are you comfortable with deferring work that I'm aware of has been sitting around since midway through the last term? Some work, but it was in the combo that Debbie presented to us, and obviously there's some other work that's popped along. But are you comfortable that we are adequately mitigating risks of potential failure of major assets out at the pool by the suggestion that this be deferred?
So this suggestion would not, if we brought the report back in December, it wouldn't change the already planned or proposed planned start date. So if we had a decision from Council in September and the decision was to progress the renewal upgrade, we could still start that in February, which is what the proposal is currently. So I'm comfortable with that. In terms of speaking to the questions around risk, I'd prefer to answer those when we bring the report back in September.
Okay, so if we do defer it to December, is December now in the motion?
Did I say December? I meant September.
September.
So that's what Andrew was talking about in terms of he'd written October, and he's prepared to change that to or earlier.
Yep.
And we're comfortable with September.
But we're deferring it beyond that. The way I read this is that the report is due in October, now September, but we're deferring that report coming back.
No, it was due in August to the August council meeting.
Yep.
What Andrew is proposing is that comes back to October, so that becomes part of your 10-year plan discussions.
Yep.
He's asked me, am I comfortable with that? I'm saying I'm comfortable to bring it back in September.
Yep.
So I'm comfortable for it not to come back in August. Our preference is for it to come back in September.
Okay, so will that mean from a process point of view that if we agree on something in September, but we haven't necessarily at that stage formalised the 10-year plan, that this work will start ahead of the 10-year plan being approved?
The intent is that we'll provide you with enough...
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing.
Yeah. The intent is that the report will provide you the information so that you can make a decision around you being comfortable enough to make this a 10-year plan discussion, or you being comfortable enough to make a decision that the work goes ahead earlier than that.
Prior to the 10-year plan?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're quite comfortable that September is the earliest that you can provide us with a detailed report that includes not only what Debbie, the detail that Debbie went through on the 12th, but also the comments and feedback from elected members at that briefing.
Yes, in terms of what Debbie was proposing, a September decision would still allow that to be implemented in the time frame required.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and the other question is perhaps more directed at the chair, and that is, in your report, Chair, you say at the briefing of elected members, it was made very clear that council is in an extremely difficult financial position, and this appears to come from the PwC report. Who made that comment at that briefing?
I would have thought that when we're being told that we've got a $12 million shortfall and that we need an 11.7% rates increase, I would have thought that would have spoken for itself. And I interpret that as us being in an extremely difficult position. And I can't interpret that briefing in any other way.
Okay, because it certainly wasn't specifically referred to. I think my reading of the PwC report, which I know we will debate in the next item, is around the challenges that the city faces rather than it being in an extremely difficult financial position. So I find that comment to be, in my view, a gross misinterpretation of the PwC report. And I feel that it is inappropriate that it should be there.
Yeah, it is the Chair's report and I'm quite comfortable that it is accurate. If I was running a company with $300 million turnover and I had debts of $350 million and I was running at a $12 million shortfall, my bank would foreclose on me.
Okay, all right. You're entitled to your opinion, but I think otherwise, and I think that statement is inappropriate there. So I'll leave that for the debate.
Mr. Chair, are we in the debate which Rob's participating in, or are we still doing questions?
It's question time.
Okay. Okay. I did ask the question, and I'll defer it to the debate. Yeah.
Councillor Ange.
Thank you. The resolution as it stands now, perhaps this is a direct question to the governance manager, still hooks the decision into the LTP, doesn't it? There's no separation as indicated by some previous questions.
Yes and no. My hesitation is that it very clearly hooks it into being considered along with other 10-year plan process matters. I don't think it constrains or restricts council from making a decision at any point to take it, to bring it forward and therefore consider it outside the 10-year plan process. However, if you're concerned that the wording doesn't reflect the views of members, happy to make it more explicit in terms of whichever way your collective thinking is on this.
So just a question to me, Andrew, then. Is your intention to simply give extra time to the staff to prepare Waterworld, to prepare the report and to have it considered as LTP, or is it just making some space for staff to finish the report?
There's two sides to this. One is that the staff need time to prepare the report in fullness, and the second part of it is that this is a $13 to $14 million spend and it needs to be considered with the big picture as we go forward. And to be jumping this in front of other considerations which will be coming up over the next couple of months would be irresponsible, in my view.
So that was a slightly debate question, but thank you for answering. So Helen, just a question to you then. You commented to Councillor Pascoe that you're prepared to answer some of the risk of, and I know this is not deferral, but those questions, you don't want to answer those today, you want to save those for when you've completed your report. Mm-hmm. And just for my peace of mind, you are comfortable with either September, because it says either September or October here.
I'm comfortable with September.
You're comfortable with September, that you'll have the work done. And there'll be a staff recommendation in that report?
There will be a staff recommendation in that report.
On the best way forward.
Yes.
So that this resolution doesn't hamper what your expert opinion going into that, and that it will obviously align with the briefing that we got from Debbie and...
Correct.
Yep, okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Could I first ask the democracy manager to check that when someone makes a point of order, they're not cut off the speaking list?
I'm sorry, we're frustrated by the technology. It's hard to put you back in the order. I make a
No, it's all
mental
right.
note to
I
include
didn't
you.
miss anything, but I immediately noticed that's why it happened.
I appreciate you reminding us. Thank you, Councillor.
And I'm comfortable if that happens, that you jump in when your turn came and take your
It's
turn
not-
back.
No big deal, but I just want for
if it gets
future
missed.
reference.
Yep.
Look, I want to ask through the Mayor to Helen, if what we're going to get back in September or October, whenever the report comes back, is going to look at the report we got the other day and separate out so that we could see essential or vital maintenance upgrades that are needed to avoid the risk of it closing versus the things that are longer term, because my impression was that what we had the other day was everything, some nice to haves and some must haves, all rolled into one package. And I had great difficulty receiving that report, hearing that report, having them all mixed in together. So I want to, I'm not asking for a recommendation or anything, I'm asking that they be shown separately.
I think what we showed you was that there are a number of interdependencies, so...
A number of...
interdependencies. So that's one of the things that we have to work through in terms of looking at an option 4. So if you actually separate some of those things out, what does that mean in terms of how each of those activities...
But at least one answer, Helen,
Yep.
and I think it might have been the roof tiling one,
Yes.
part of it, showed that some of the things could be done in isolation.
Potentially, and it depends to what standard and also what the long-term associated risks might be with that. So what...
Well, are we going to get
what
those?
Does that mean? But we will be covering that off in
Yeah.
the report, yes. Yeah.
Because I found that the most difficult report I've seen for several years into council in terms of upgrades and essential work, because it didn't just include that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Paula.
Couple of questions at this time. Would there be any willingness to remove the October and bring it to September? Because you've already said you were comfortable, Helen, with September. I'm not sure how comfortable you are pushing it into October.
I've just left October in there. It will be fully at the discretion of Helen and her staff. So if she can get it done by September, that's great. If she can't, there's another option.
Okay,
So I don't want to come back with another amendment, another change to this, another chair's report.
Okay,
because
well, that
didn't
might
quite
make
get
a material difference to me, but I'm just asking the question. So if this, and the intent, you've been clear, Mayor Andrew, that the intent is to line this big project up with all other LTP projects, that because of the considerable sum of money required for it.
Staff need the time as well to get the report together.
Yeah, no, I understand that bit. I'm familiar with the work, as Chair of Community and Services, I'm familiar with the pace of this work. What is the potential date implication for new work to start if it goes into an LTP discussion versus it proceeded on the timeline we initially had for it, Helen? Do you get my point? How long would it be before the general public saw improvements and repairs to this well-loved facility if it goes in the LTP discussion, as opposed to if it just followed the track that it was on, we were going to bring it later this year? And
I mean, September, it can still go into the 10-year, be part of the 10-year plan discussion. So, I mean, the reason I'm comfortable with the September date is because it does give us more time, and it also, we're comfortable with the time that it would allow us to implement something earlier. So in relation to your question, it really depends what the outcome of that decision would be, Paula. Yeah.
so if we were going to do a significant body of work, that's what I'm talking about, that this could lead to a deferral on that work being commenced.
The report itself, regardless of this recommendation, can lead council to making many options. There's 4 options up, and one of them is deferral.
Yeah.
But to rest assured, if council makes a decision to progress with it, it's important from a 10-year plan funding point of view because it represents our opening position, but there's nothing stopping council making a decision to start that work before the 10-year plan period starts, and that's entirely at the discretion of this council.
That's right. I'm just wary that if the report comes later, it slides into the LTP plan, gets stacked against the other projects. As Helen has said, potentially the start of work could be delayed. Just clarifying that.
Again, that's the discretion of this council.
That's right. So also just the option, we didn't actually take a vote. We had a discussion in the update and the workshop about the new option that Mayor Andrew brought to the table that we hadn't heard about before, and we have no information about that, of course. And I know that this provides Helen the time to put some information around that, but I don't recall, did we have a vote on that? Because they're workshops, they're not formal decision making. We had a discussion.
It would be inappropriate and actually wrong to have a vote in a briefing. It's not a formal meeting and it's not a binding decision.
That's
forum.
right, so it's a discussion
and it is an opportunity for elected members to give direction to staff about work that they would want to see progressed.
yeah, so if the
et
majority
cetera.
of people feel the same way, that work can be progressed. That's, I guess, was what driving ahead. Are we aware that the majority of councils wanted the additional option put in? I don't know.
I don't believe that's
I'm just asking that
comment for me to
question. No, I can't recall, and I don't have the minutes or record of that meeting. But all sorts of ideas come to those updates. They don't all necessarily generate new bodies of work. That was just all I was interested in.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Just following on from Paula's questions, and she's a little bit confused me a wee bit. Nothing has been determined on the pools, has it, in terms of this? So to say some body of work was going to start and now is going to be stopped, am I correct in saying, to say a body of work was going to get started but now it's not going to get started because no decision has been made at all, and all that's been happened so far is a condition assessment has been reported to us by the staff. We have been given a whole lot of options. Andrew put in another option, and we haven't made any formal decision at all. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, that's correct.
And there is, and I believe. Sorry, and this is going to sound like a debate, but wouldn't you consider it is probably logical to weigh this project up with all the other projects in our long-term plan? There's an awful lot, isn't there still an awful lot of information to be gathered, quotes to be got, value engineering decisions to be made before anything logical could come out from this debate?
That's where we're heading.
I think I thought
that's
that's
what the action time's for.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gary. Councillor Ange.
Mayor Andrew, just supplementary question following on from Councillor Southgate's. To the CEO, the risk and why I'm struggling with whether or not I'll support the motion is that if it's captured, and I know it's not being captured now, but at a later date, if it's captured within the LTP budget, how can we then progress with doing any work, because the LTP budget is subject to special consultative process? If we started some work within that net, the public have their chance to have feedback, which is not till next year. They could say, no, we don't want that.
Yep, so firstly, council can make a decision today, if it was on the table, to undergo the refurbishment of Waterworld. In itself, I don't believe that refurbishment would be considered a significant decision and wouldn't require special consultative processes. It may require some form of engagement with the community, but not a full consultative process. So we can do that decision at any stage. But the challenge we've got is the funding argument, is to bring the funding discussion alongside the other funding discussions. So council could go through and make a decision in September to progress straight away with the Waterworld refurbishment without a special consultative procedure, but at least it would have done it in the context of understanding what the other compromises were that would be given up by spending that money on Waterworld. And that effectively, that's I think what this motion is trying to achieve, is to enable that weighing up of use of money. It may not necessarily fall in the same financial period, because it may not. If this may be done in January next year, we might start it, for example, or February. But at least we have that everything in front of us discussion, and we can weigh it up.
So thank you for that debate. You haven't answered my question. My question was, if the long-term plan is a 10-year budget that we must consult on.
Yes.
If the decision for Waterworld is captured in that budget, we have to consult on all of that budget. Therefore, how we would have to wait till public submissions come next April, May next year. How could we start the work on the Waterworld renewals if it's captured in that 10-year budget?
I think I'll respond to that. We can do what we like as a council as long as we consider it from a significant engagement point of view. You can take, like I said today, you make a decision to fund Waterworld and go on with it. By including it in discussion here, you don't necessarily have to include it as an item to be included in the 10-year plan. It's just considering it from a funding point of view against the other projects as part of the 10-year plan process, I think is what the Mayor's recommendations trying to achieve. So you could make a decision as council's choice to put it in the 10-year plan and consult on it. You could make a decision to, after considering all the options, to go ahead and do it within this period, knowing full well it's going to have downstream impacts on your available funding for other projects. And by doing it as part of the 10-year plan, you can have that consideration.
So I understand that we can make a separate decision outside the 10-year plan to just get on with the work. What I'm trying to ascertain is if it's captured in a net of the 10-year budget, the whole project, and we have to go out in that net and consult and get public feedback on the entirety of that budget, how could we then start work on the Waterworld? It would be pulling something out.
So how do I articulate this? So firstly, this is to be included in the 10-year plan process, not in the 10-year plan. So this is about considering the funding obligations or the funding commitment for a pool versus a road versus other items as part of that funding discussion in terms of preparing the budget, predominantly because whatever we spend has long-term impact on our debt availability and there has an impact on that period. You then have a choice as a council. If you want to progress with the pool, you can make a choice once you consider that you've got enough money to do it, to either put it into your 10-year plan process, and that will delay it, but you also have a choice to actually go ahead and do it outside the 10-year plan document and do it as part of this year's budget, but having given consideration to the full commitments in the 10-year plan.
But you only just now answered it, Richard. You said if it's in the 10-year plan, it will delay it. That's what I was asking.
But it's your choice whether you put it in the 10-year plan.
Yes, no, of course I know that.
Okay.
I've been around the table for 10 years. I'm very familiar with decisions. But that was the answer. So after the third time, thank you, I got it. Because what I was hearing from Helen was, or what I was interpreting from what Helen was saying was confusing me, but you have just answered it. If it's captured within the 10-year plan budget, it's delayed. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move to debate. There's no one who wants to debate, so I'll move. Do we have a seconder? Nice try. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, so I've moved, seconded by Gary, Councillor Gary, and first speaker is Councillor McPherson.
Thanks. Look, it's clear that the pool has become a bit of a cause célèbre for the opposition here, which is interesting because it's not normally something that would unite people in that way, but it's a good icon for them. I think we should reflect on how that discussion came up at the meeting couple of weeks, 3 weeks ago. That came out of the blue. I've been listening to issues to do with pool maintenance, pool development for 19 years now. It's come up almost every year, and there's been a steady progression of upgrades and maintenance and whatnot that we've had to do, and there's been some propositions coming up about further development in the pool, and that's all fine, and we sort of knew in advance they were coming up. What really disturbed me, and I touched on it when I asked Helen a question before, was it came out of the blue, we had no warning about that, and suddenly there's a proposal for a 14 million emergency expenditure almost. And I'm sorry, whenever I get that, I smell V8 rats. This is, if someone says it's an emergency and it's such a big project as that, I wonder why we haven't been given any warning, why we haven't heard about these things earlier, why they're not part of the general maintenance program and almost business as usual. So I'm quite suspicious about the whole thing, to be honest, say that up front. I particularly think it's a bad way to handle things. And when I looked at the different elements in the project, and which I was trying to tease out with Helen before, there are some things that I will probably agree must be done almost straight away, because there is a high risk of failure, physical failure of the stuff, but they are not all in that category. And to have them all wrapped up into one package was really, to me, like jumping the gun on the LTP. And I think, to be honest, if we approve that sort of project, to fast track it, to start it in the next few months, then we're going to be putting things like the developments that some of you want for the river plan, in the zoo plan, maybe some of the road safety plans and things like that are discretionary. We're going to be putting them at risk, and we at the very least owe it to those sorts of projects to look at this project alongside them. So that's why I think it's important that we do what the Mayor suggested here, roll the discussions into the LTP plan. If there's enough votes around the table and we think it's important enough, we may well go ahead with that, but it should be looked at side by side with the others, not looked at as something that must be done now and we'll talk about the other things later. And I'm disturbed about the way it's come up and the way we've actually allowed it to come up like that, because I think that is jumping the gun, and it's not all emergency work. If it was emergency, then I would expect those emergency elements to come up, like happened with the pipe, the water pipe, when the river washed it out, and we had to do something because that was absolute core business of council. I believe pools are core business of council, but not some of the work that was included in the package that we got the other day. So I don't want to put the rest of council's work in terms of the projects that we've been talking about at risk by treating this one in a different way. So that's why I'm going to be supporting the resolution.
Thank you. Councillor Rob.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I can't support the recommendation. I fear that this is just another one of these deferrals. To me, the pool is business as usual. We have there a community facility that has got worn assets, and those those worn assets need replacing. And I've known as a councillor in the last term and for a number of months, even probably years, that there are worn assets out at the pool, and we have around this table at various times discussed that. So to me, there isn't a surprise in some of the areas, certainly a surprise in terms of the cost to do it. There's no, and given that this is business as usual, there's no suggestion that the asset is no longer required and therefore will be closed down. If it was, then let's not do it, but that certainly isn't the case that I have. Again, I add to business as usual, there's a real risk with worn assets, that there is a real risk of failure. And if the work determined by our asset management plans and professional input from our staff is urgent, then it needs to be planned for now rather than being deferred. Recent experience by Hamilton City Council around maintaining its assets has been abysmal. And in the short time that I've been around this table, we've been through the municipal pools, the Founders Theatre, and I dug out the minutes of the 9th of December 2014 in respect to the Founders Theatre, and I noticed there that at that particular council meeting, Messrs King and Mallet, and here we go again today with King and Mallet, sought deferral of the fly tower and the additional expenditure, which totaled $13.8 million in terms of the development of the 10-year plan. And that amendment that Messrs King Mallet, supported by Messrs Gallagher and McPherson, sought deferral of any commitment until a business case was prepared 3 years after the annual plan was concluded. Fortunately, that amendment was lost, but only by the chair intervening with her casting vote. So here's another case today where we're looking at something that's quite similar, another asset, an asset that isn't going to be closed down, so it needs to be maintained, and we're looking for a reason to push it into the same list as all of the other competing projects for the 10-year plan. I add to also around the assets the recent closing of the City Library. So look, there are reasons why some of these events occurred, but in behind it there has been this failure to maintain assets. So we're told now that we have good asset management plans in place. If these and the advice of our professional staff indicate that the work needs to be done, why should we now be delaying it? And we would be derelict of our duties to do that. So I will be not supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Councillor Ange.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I will not be supporting the recommendation either, the motion either. Our public needs our city pool to be open. It's one of the only few family activities that's still affordable in the city. And if this is captured in the future through the LTP, work will not be able to start until 2019. This is core business, this is community stuff, this is basic stuff. We need to get on with it.
Point of order. If something is captured in the LTP, it could start as early as July next year, not 2019. That's an inaccurate statement.
Thank you.
In the briefing that we had from staff, the option said if the decision was to capture it in the LTP, work wouldn't start until 2019. I am referring to the staff briefing notes. The delay in looking after community assets is the reason why we don't have a theatre, and it is the reason why we don't have a central library. And I'm predicting that if we delay the pool and it is captured in the LTP budget, that we can add our city pool to the list of things closed for Hamilton. No more delays, we need to get on with it. I cannot support this resolution.
Councillor Paula.
Mayor Andrew, this will come as no surprise to anyone because I raised a red flag some time ago about the condition of the pool. It's falling apart. It's pretty disgraceful, actually, as a city asset goes, in my view. It's a well-loved, well-used facility, and the public want us to maintain it. If there is any smell, Councillor McPherson, at all, it's probably due to the grossly deferred maintenance of these pools. But otherwise, I do agree with you in terms of how have we landed in a situation with such a big fix required. I'm familiar with the work that staff have been doing because it comes under my portfolio of Community and Services Chair, and I've seen draft aspects of the report. I've been out to the swimming pool and I've had a really good close look. We did have a little trip at the beginning of council to the pools, you will recall, and the things were pointed out. But I've been back since, and I can't unsee what I saw. And what I saw was an embarrassing facility for our city. And I believe that we need to get on with it. If you follow some of the considerable feedback that some of us have had through our social media channels, you will see that people do want us just to get on and bring the pool up to a reasonable standard. We're talking about maybe some emergency aspects could be done little bits and pieces ahead of the LTP, but the report makes it quite clear that there's an interconnectedness around the work. If we are to fix the 50-year-old pipe system, remember, it's underneath the pool, those pipes are asbestos. If we're to fix those, then it will lead to a lot of consequential things about having to heighten the pool, heighten the sides, fix the terrible flooring. I mean, what's right about that flooring? I can go there and I can bend down and pick it up with my hands and crumble it. That's not right. Our city deserves better than that. It's a sea of safety mats because of the trip hazards. Our city deserves better than that. And quite honestly, I've become quite invested and passionate about this city asset. As my colleagues have already said, we've deferred maintenance and some other things, and as soon as that happens, we're into the situation of the library and the founders. Then, of course, we have to do earthquake proofing to keep our community safe. Look, I know there's a lot of work coming in the LTP, and we're going to have to make some pretty hard decisions about what we can fund and when we're going to fund it. But this is vital. Let's get on with it. Let's have the report. I feel very strongly frustrated that I know that there's a body of work coming to councillors, and we're trying to duck in front of it and make other decisions. Let's see the report in September, not October. Let's see it in September. I'm not very comfortable that in workshops, new options can just plop into the middle of a work stream and cause staff to run off and do more work without the majority of council agreeing to that. However, I'm really happy to see a full body of work around the pools, and I do believe that the public will be most disappointed, as my other colleagues have said, if we find ourselves to be a city where we can say to others, oh, we have no city public central library, we have no major theatre, and we have no swimming pool at the moment. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thanks, Andrew. We're not in a business as usual situation. We're in a situation where the council is facing unprecedented growth. We're in a situation where a firm of accountants, PwC, have given us reports showing that based on our current 10-year plan, our 2015 to 2024 10-year plan, shows us operating at $12 million deficits. This is this one item in itself, the $13 million we've been advised on a best estimate basis is the cost, is greater, would more than double that deficit with one fell stroke. Business as usual should be council operating with surpluses, maintaining its debt to revenue ratios, but in fact, and if we do not consider this item along with our entire 10-year plan, we're going to start ending up having all sorts of priorities lost. We'll lose all of our priorities. This thing will be considered, from impassioned speeches, as Paula put in, and I totally respect her response. But she's dealing with one issue. We've got to look at this whole thing in a 10-year plan, and that's all this is. All this resolution is trying to do. So I can't see at all how we are in a business as usual scenario here. We are not. We are way out of our financial limits and guidelines. We are way beyond business as usual. This is an effort to try and bring things back into business as usual by trying to balance everything up and view the whole picture, not just one item. So I will be supporting the resolution.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I find this a really interesting debate, and I'm cognisant. I go back to the big ones that I've been involved in since I've been here: the parking one and the river plan one, where some people saw it as snuck stuff through the door. Councillor Southgate herself was very keen to push these into the LTP, these discussions. But I'm cognisant of the fact that despite her judgment into that, she supported the parking initiatives, and I'm grateful to her for that. So she supported that policy, and she supported the river plan being out of the long-term plan. Because when I heard, let's put it into the long-term plan, like a small child asking his parent for someone and his parents saying, we'll see, that's what putting something in the long-term plan seems to become council vernacular for. Look, it's pretty simple. Should it be pushed into the long-term plan alongside other projects, or is it more urgent? Now look at our situation. In the recent years, we've lost the municipal pools, Founders Theatre and the library. We look like Waterworld is getting very close, and that's the judgment we have to make. I don't want to be a part of a council that doesn't provide pools, libraries and theatres, quite frankly. And I think putting it into the long-term plan where it gets pushed with everything else puts it at that great risk. I remember Councillor Casson, when he was running for mayor, said he was embarrassed of the council who would let a Founders Theatre deteriorate so badly that it had to be shut. So I'll be interested to see how things go there. I don't want to see it along with other items. I'll be supporting Councillor Southgate's initiative in this, actually.
Okay, so this is a chair's report that's been put up. Sorry, I didn't have anyone else on the speaking list. I was taking my right to reply. Councillor Martin, Justin Todd.
Just through the Chief Executive to Helen, just let's go back slowly through the impact of this motion. Now, obviously, on a risk register, if there is a significant refurb of the pools, they close anyway. It's a matter of when they close. Can you just repeat for us the realistic impact on the pools of this motion? Okay, this motion wants things to be considered in the context, responsibly, in the context of all the other projects we have. We also are, as I understand it, are looking at a major multi-million-dollar huge refurb of the pools versus basic maintenance to keep them going. We're looking at regional funding, all of these things. So just would you go back and...
Deputy Mayor Martin, question time's over. I'll let Helen answer this question.
Yeah, sure.
But no more questions.
Thank you for
We're
your
actually in
generosity.
debate.
Thank you for your generosity.
This motion, with the option to bring a report back in September, has no impact on our ability for your ability to make a decision to bring the work earlier or to defer it. So it makes no change to the current status. You can still make the decision you need to make.
No impact to the current status. And I will say this, colleagues, one of my worst nightmares in this chamber was the V8 5 minutes to midnight, where certain people came from across the Tasman and gave us some options. And we, in our true spirit of public service, we weren't going to make a lot of money, no money. I felt, to a degree, in my humble view, were railroaded. I also am aware that we have an audit and risk committee. So if this particular motion does not meet the spirit of due diligence, responsible governance, I expect the external members of the Audit and Risk Committee to tell us. And if they tell us immediately that this particular motion does not meet that criteria, I will come straight back into this chamber and sort. One of the consequences of a major refurb of Waterworld, which is probably going to be the only option I suspect left to us, is Rototuna gone, go, out for pools. Lots of other things will obviously fall by the wayside. Zooplan, gone, out. You know, not often I agree with Councillor Mallett, but you can't have 10 projects or 5 projects if you can't afford them. You have to make choices. I strongly suspect this project will suck up a significant amount of our resource in terms of our 10-year plan. I get that. But I'm very confused as to this debate, because the staff have told you it actually makes no difference. It sits there on a risk register. If there's a change in that circumstance, our CEO will come straight back to us. So I'm going to now be supporting this particular motion.
Okay, so let's go to the vote. So all those for, raise their hands, please. Oh, we'll go to the board. Okay, we'll go to the hands. All those for, raise their hands.
Mayor King, Councillor Gallagher, Councillor Taylor, Councillor Bunting, Councillor Casson, Councillor McPherson, Councillor Mallett, for.
Those against, those opposed.
Councillors Henry, Councillors Southgate, Councillors Pascoe, Toman and O'Leary against.
Thank you.
The motion is carried.
So we'll move to item 10. We welcome Justin, Andrew and Brent to the table, and David, this is your report. So, are you happy to stay where you are? Yep. Okay, so I'll hand over to you to start with, David. Thank you.
So I think...
Could you just bring another chair up, Brent, too, and move up to the front? Thank you.
We just brought him so that he could make the rest of the team look good. But come forward, Brent. I'm just going to hand straight over to Justin to kick off. This is the formal aspect of the report that was previously discussed at a briefing earlier by PwC. So over to you, Justin.
Thanks. Do I need to push the button to talk, or it's all working fine? So look, thank you, Mayor Andrew, thank you, councillors, for the opportunity to present to you. And as Chief Exec has described, this is we had that opportunity 2 weeks ago at the briefing, which we greatly appreciated. You've now received our full report. And look, we were intending to touch on the highlights, a sort of executive summary, but absolutely take questions as the main purpose of today. Just a couple of introductory comments. First is, look, our scope was an independent review of the financial strategy of the council, and leading out of that was whether it is appropriate given the challenges that the council faces largely around growth. And if I were to summarise that in a couple of sentences, they would be that the current financial strategy, which was adopted in 2012 and was reaffirmed in 2015, was appropriate, and the council is in a better financial position than it would have been thanks to that strategy. Important word there, was appropriate, because the reality is that growth over the last few years and forecast is significantly higher than was forecast at the time of the 2015 10-year plan. And that presents significant funding challenges, meaning that that financial strategy should change. If I can refer you to page 7 of our report.
Which is page 86 of the council agenda, thank you.
Thanks. And what we've attempted to, it's page 86, I think it was, yeah. So that's the page which is called Key Presentation Points and has eight boxes on it. Those are, if we were to summarise in 8 sentences, which we've attempted to do here, is the culmination of our work. The first one, which is very important, is that our work was based on the latest available information, which is your adjusted 2015 10-year plan and information available at this date. As you're all well aware, there's a process underway in the 2018, the draft 2018 10-year plan. Look, what I would say very importantly is clearly information changes. The view from the council executives and ourselves is that information is not going to change any of the key messages here. The key messages are valid in our view. There's no new information, which means the messages that we're portraying are invalid. But it's just an acknowledgement that information is always getting better. Second point, I've already made that point, is that growth in Hamilton City is occurring far quicker than was envisaged in 2015 and is expected to continue at that quicker rate. The third point is in 2018, the current financial year, 2017-18, Council's forecasting a net operating deficit under our revised approach of what is a sustainable operating profit or deficit measure. And look, on that point, I'm quite comfortable if we'd like to move into more detail around what that measure is. I know we discussed it at the briefing, but if there are questions around that measure, now would probably be quite a good time to address those questions.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Going back to your first one, just to be clear, point 1, this report is based on adjusted 2015 10-year plan and information available as at the current date. I assume that information available at the current date could not have included what the situation we were just talking about before, the $13 million required for Waterworld.
Correct.
So none of your analysis is factored in, oh, by the way, there's another $13 million for Waterworld?
Unless that was in the latest AMPs, it wouldn't be in our... So when I say information available at the current date is clearly the AMP process is constantly being updated. And so when I say current date, you know, it's probably one from several weeks ago that we received that AMP.
No, that's the answer. It's not included. Okay, so the situation is, if we had gone ahead with Waterworld just before, that would have made the whole thing $13 million worse. Is that right? What's your point of order?
that's irrelevant to this discussion
It's
before
utterly
us.
critical, utterly critical. I'm trying to find out what is included in this thing. I'm trying to find out if the water world
Hang on,
thing is
Gary,
included.
excuse me, Gary.
What's your problem with that?
Gary, can you not talk across the table, please?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, it's not for you to reply to a point of order. Okay,
is
Gary,
there
can
a
you
rule on
continue?
it?
You can continue.
Have you got a point of order or not?
What exactly is your point of order?
This is not on topic. This is not talking about the. We were asked to comment on the measure. We're not asked to speculate on things that we hadn't even agreed to fund or not fund at this time.
Can I ask the Chief Executive to...
So just factually, the information that's presented in front of you does not include the financial impact of the previous discussion because it wasn't available at that point in time.
Thank you. That clarify things. Thank you.
You can continue, Councillor Gary.
Oh, that was it. Just what figures we are talking about when we talk about the information available.
Thank you. Councillor Ange.
Thank you. I just have some questions. This will either be to David Bryant or the CE, I'm not too sure. On a different string, I was concerned to read on page 29 under the financial of the report, the cost of the PwC report being... Sorry, page 79 of our agenda. The cost of the report being reported as $180,000. Is that the final cost, and does that include GST?
So can I ask the Chief Executive to answer that question?
That is the final cost, and no, it doesn't include GST.
So we normally, when we normally report figures, we don't report GST, do we?
No, because it's we're able to claim back the GST on this. So for the net cost to council is $180,000.
Okay, so I just wanted to clarify that. Can I ask what budget that came out of?
There's no budget for that. I discussed that with council when I requested it, that there wasn't a budget for this, but I still pursued to do the work.
But this is the first time that we've seen the $180,000, isn't it?
I indicated that the cost of the work would be between $150,000 and $200,000 at that stage.
Is that in a council report? Because this is the first time that I'm seeing it.
No, there was a verbal update by myself, so it wasn't in the council report.
Okay, so if it's an unbudgeted item, where do we pick this up? Will this appear in risk and opportunities?
Yes, it does.
It does, okay.
Yep. So for a large part, the last financial report that was presented to council included these costs. Oh, no, sorry. Oh, June, sorry. Yep, I've got my periods out of whack. So they're included in the financial year to 30 June 2018.
Oh, so this new financial year?
17.
No,
Sorry.
17.
I'm dealing with too many periods at the moment. Sorry, Councillor Leary.
I know, it's difficult, isn't
The
it?
year just finished.
The year just finished, so...
Thank you. To be absolutely clear,
Okay,
rather than
so-
dates. Dates are important though, Councillor Miller.
Okay, so question is the information contained in this report something that our finance team could have done and they're just at capacity at the moment and they don't have the time?
So when I presented on the reason I engaged PwC, it was for two reasons. Three reasons actually. Firstly was the finance team is capable to undertake a significant part of this work, but had bandwidth issues. So if we were to request the finance team to do it, it would have meant other work would have to be compromised, and that would have been the 10-year plan process. So I made it clear that this piece of work was critical, but it wasn't as critical as a 10-year plan. So we kept the team involved. The second part of this piece of work was there was a degree of IP we brought in to bring PwC into the mix. There's some parts of this that is beyond the current work mandate of the finance team, and through this we've actually been able to refine the models we use within the finance team because of that IP, that intellectual property that PwC have brought to the table. And the third part behind this, and it was I stated this a number of times, is I wanted, given the nature and the focus of this piece of work, I wanted an independent assessment of that work as well. So these are the three reasons I chose to use an external party to do that work.
Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Question to Richard. Do you think in the staff recommendation that the council receives this report, is rather light use of the detail that's in the PwC report. I can understand that in the key presentation points, particularly around revenue, that I would expect those items to be picked up by the Financial Strategy and Revenue Task Force. But there's also a lot of detail in the report around how we use our asset management plans, what business as usual is, which we talked about in the last debate, also around development contributions and also around growth. And some of those areas are not specifically aligned to revenue, which is the work of the Financial Strategy and Revenue Task Force. I'm just a little bit worried if we move this report through as with the staff recommendation, that work on those particular areas might well never happen, simply because the focus will be solely on looking for revenue.
I understand your concern. The reason we put the recommendation to receive the report was there's a number of work streams underway currently, and we're in process in asset management plan, the 10-year plan, the finance revenue task force as well. What the attempt for this report was to do was to bring in a recommendation to get this on the table. There's going to be subsequent recommendations at different points in time about locking and loading asset management plans and locking and loading the recommendations from the committee you're the chair of and so forth, which will come in and be that beacon for those particular areas coming forward. So today was purely about getting this on record, and then there's already just about every item on here, and I can ask PwC to comment on this, is a work in process within council already. And it's just a case of making sure that when they come back to council, they now reflect the intent that's been put forward and probably summarised by PwC. But I'm happy for you to direct your question towards them to confirm that position.
Well, I think it's how we pick the report up and use it. That was the intent of my question.
Yep. And we have picked it up and
I'd perhaps like to see something reasonably soon that shows where those particular work streams will start from and what the timeline might be around them, because it's pretty easy for us to focus on that sort of knee-jerk issue around the measurement that we're using to reporting our balancing of the books, and deal with that in isolation of all of the other good work that's in here that are just as important issues for this council, given the discussion in the last matter around how we should be funding what is really things like depreciation, which is essentially what we spent a good deal of time in the last debate around whether or not something like that should sit alongside new projects rather than something which is just a renewal of an existing asset.
Yep. So
I don't think we've got those policies around this council that well defined.
One of the things, so firstly, everything in this report is in work train within council at the moment, whether it's within David's team, Chris's team, or the asset management work. Blair's been heavily involved in it from a growth point of view. There's some additional work that's coming out of this which is feeding into the Housing Infrastructure Fund work. So I think what I need to do is bring you back that to council, that mapping of how it all sits within. And I think it's probably an update on the 10-year plan, because the 10-year plan is the overarching catalyst behind this. So what we'll do is give you an update of where we're at as a 10-year plan, as well as how this feeds into it and so forth.
Yeah, I'd like to see that a bit earlier, because we seem to be pushing aside the business as usual renewals and pushing everything into the 10-year plan as if they're major decisions.
No, that wasn't the point. Sorry, Councillor Pascoe. What I was saying is I think I need to bring you an update on the 10-year plan process. So in the next council meeting, I'll bring you an update on everything that's currently in play and where it's at and what it's doing and what it's leading to, including an update on this. So so I'm not saying push this to the 10-year plan. I'm saying I'll bring you an update of the 10-year plan process.
Okay. Thank you.
Back to you.
So look, I'll continue from point 3, which was this point of an operating deficit under the revised approach. And I probably
Can I just interrupt for a minute? From now on with questions, can we direct the questions directly to the part of the report which is being talked about? All the questions that came up nearly all the questions that came up then were wide-ranging and I said nearly all of them were wide-ranging, weren't specific to the part of the report referred to. So if you could keep your questions directly to the part of the report being referred to as we go through, there will be a chance at the end for broader-ranging questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So yes, that revised approach, which is probably easiest described as the ensuring that the everyday costs of running the city, including replacement of assets, is met by everyday revenues. And under that measure, item 4 would say that in 2018 there's a $12.1 million shortfall. And simplistically, to illustrate the size of that shortfall, we said if you were to meet that shortfall through a rates increase, so if you were entirely going to say, okay, we're going to make up that shortfall immediately through a rates increase, that would be an additional 7.9% rates increase on top of your 3.8%. Now, that's just acknowledging a shortfall could be met in various ways. It could be cost reduction is one way of closing that gap of 12.1 million. But to illustrate here, we said if you weren't having a cost reduction and you were going to meet that through increasing rates, that would be the size of the one-off rates increase.
So just directly to the part of the item that we're talking about, so we're starting with Paula. Sorry, Mark, you jumped in. Paula, you're back. You're on, Paula.
So yes, when we discussed this at the Finance and Revenue meeting, we all understand the shortfall, and we understand that you could take a one-off hit with rates. 7.9 was around about 8 when we first heard about it. That's good. That's good. There are a number of other tools available to us that we were going to develop further, and that's things like the potential of targeted rates, public-private partnerships, and those kind of things. So it doesn't all have to be met by cost reduction because the graph shows that a lot of the costs that we need to meet are the unfunded AMPs, the new projects and strategies, and then the unforeseen, like when you have a facility fail or something like that, right? We've got a margin at the top. That's why we've only got the 230, not 250 debt ratio. So tell me, for the rest of the councillors who don't sit in this, how are we going to progress the discussion around other things than cost reduction? Because, to be quite honest, 95% of our time since I've been on this council has been about cutting things rather than slicing things differently or finding new opportunities. What's your view on that, or where's that going? Maybe that's Chief Executive to answer.
Firstly, the mandate the request and the scope of work to PwC wasn't to look for alternative funding mechanisms, it was to identify the gap. And the reason they stated a rates increase or a cost reduction is to provide the size of the issue. Mm-hmm. But I think it more fits within the work that's been led by Councillor Pascoe in terms of I keep forgetting the name of the task force, the Revenue and Financing Task Force is very much looking at those broader opportunities in terms of other funding mechanisms, and targeted rates has been something that's been looked at as part of that discussion. And that's the discussion that this council is obligated to look at as part of the 10-year plan process in the revenue and financing policy, is to consider the way in which it chooses to fund its activities. And so the work that revenue and financing, the work that task force is doing is a legitimate place for that discussion to have. And then they'll make a recommendation back to council to look at other opportunities for funding. Yeah,
so we did have that discussion. PwC were in the room when we discussed the tools, and they, in my view, my recollection was you did accept that there would be a number of other tools beside cost reduction to address this issue. That's sure. And so now under Rob's leadership of that committee, we're going to look at that. I think it's really important. I just wanted to make sure that the words other financial targeted rates or other financial mechanisms gets kept in the mix, because quite often the word that we're hearing is cost reduction, cost reduction, cost reduction. Let's keep the other debate a little alive. I'm wondering how that's going to happen if we don't let councillors know about it. Anyway, sorry, that was probably more of a statement.
Councillor Mark.
I'll get the question.
So can you please make this really simple? You're saying a 7.9% one-off hit in rates or increase in rates would get us back on target.
this, I take it that's plus the 3.8 projected. What would happen the next year?
Appreciate the question, Councillor Mark, and I think it sort of addresses a point that Councillor Paula raised as well, which I want to touch on. That is based on the 2015 LTP, and this is a critical point.
Right.
So, to put it really bluntly, that doesn't solve the problems, because there's a whole lot of other things which are unfunded in the existing 2015 LTP. So I really appreciate the question. It was to illustrate if the latest adjusted 2015 plan was the best view of what's happening over the next, 7 years remaining in that plan, that would get you to break even straight away, and then you'd actually start to build up surpluses and debt capacity. But in fact, and this is the point we highlight on page 9, the bottom left-hand corner of page 9 of our report shows, hey, but there's a whole lot of things that have happened since you did your last LTP, most of which are the result of high growth, which mean actually there's a whole lot of other funding challenges.
Right, okay. Thank you. Makes it clear.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr Mayor. So item 5 is just touching, and people have already mentioned it, on that debt to revenue ratio, which is set by the LGFA limit of 250%. Our view, and I think Council's view as well, is 230 is a sort of practical limit that you want to have, because it always leaves a little bit more for unforeseen events, emergencies, etc. And I guess this is addressing your point, Councillor Mark, item 6, that rates increase would get you to that net operating surplus break-even point immediately, but this funding gap, and I would actually ask people to turn to page 9 of our report, which must be page 88, which is probably simplest illustrated in that chart on the bottom left of page 88 of your papers. What that chart is showing is in the period out to 2025, so that first column, CapEx requirements, that period out to 2025, so the remainder of the 10-year plan, what is the amounts which aren't in the plan, which now appear to be required to be invested? If we look at the various items there, and I'll let Andrew run through each of those, working up from the unfunded AMPs.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. So the 311 mil there for unfunded AMPs is the portion of the total value of the AMP plans which is not in the 2015 LTP. So the total expenditure is around about $1 billion, and that portion is the unfunded amount only. And obviously all of those AMPs are currently being updated. The next piece is the, is the plans and strategies. So the river plan, the central city transformation plan, the bike plan, I think there's about 24 in total, of which there's 3 or 4 larger ones. So those total 170 mil. And again, that's the unfunded portion when we look back at the 2015 LTP. So they'll come into the mix for consideration under the current program of work as well. And then we get into Rotokauri and Peacock. So those have been identified under the urban growth strategy as the next potential greenfield sites. Whether they, there's still debate around each of those, but based on the modelling of delivering the infrastructure to open those sites up, if we were to do that on an accelerated basis, so bring a lot of the expenditure which was outside the LTP forward to deliver the new growth projections, which the 2018 plan will adopt, then that would bring that level of funding in. So that totals 1.15 billion. Then we look at our debt capacity of 178 mil in the middle graph. So if we set that limit at 230%, based on our revenue, again on the 2015 LTP at 2025, we'd have 178 mil of debt capacity. And then we know that we receive roughly 51% of all of our major transport infrastructure expenditure is funded by an NZTA subsidy. So we factor that in, which leaves an 806 mil funding gap. Now then what we've done is there's a couple of other boxes on the third graph. So we've got 11.7 there. So that's our 7.9% increase plus the 3.8. So, and it's illustrative because it's the current year in progress. But if we had made that adjustment and we'd reached a break-even position, and then that increase carried through, because that's obviously the rates increase, but then we're assuming the 3.8 per annum thereafter throughout the LTP period to 2025. That would increase that debt capacity to 401 million, so bringing an additional 223 mil into the availability. The other new box, the fourth box up, is realigning the new growth rates. So we've got DC modelling with higher growth rates than the LTP revenue. And again, that's the DC modelling and infrastructure modelling is going through an update and a change and is being realigned. And I understand that's a fairly sizable project, but if we align those based on the current information, we would have $149 million more revenue. So that funding gap, once we take into consideration those two extra boxes or events, reduces down to 400. And then I guess we lead on to where Paula got to earlier, is there's, if we'd put through that rates increase, we've still got a funding gap. There's a range of measures which the Revenue Task Force are looking at and addressing that, as well as the debate around priorities and the framework which Council and staff will work through around AMPs and unfunded plans and the priority of expenditure.
Yeah, and if I could just sort of add that on that last point. So that first column there, which comes to obviously a very large unfunded number, I just want to emphasise that, PwC hasn't formed a judgment around that expenditure. It's simply saying, well, this is what, if we take the information that's coming out of your council, your employees around what the asset management plans are, etc., we haven't submerged ourselves in a debate about priorities, because quite rightly that's a decision for the council to make those debates around priorities. So in this analysis, we've just kind of accepted that number and then said, well, what does the funding gap look like if you accept that number as a given?
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Just going back to item 5. So there are two things you've recommended. The first is to increase the debt to revenue ratio from 200%. So that means our debt can be twice what our revenue is, from 200% to 230%. Which increases, which is the 178 million.
Yes, so 200 was your target
that's
under
right,
your
that's
strategy?
right. So that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about our existing strategy and the recommendation you're putting to us. And the second one, and just want to be clear that I've got this one right, we've also changed the definition of our revenue, haven't we? So we have increased the amount of our revenue that our debt can be 30% more than it was previously, not 30%, sorry, goes from 200% to 230% of our revenue, but our revenue has reduced, hasn't it? Because we are only accounting for revenue, the 35% of DCs that is attributable to interest.
No, so the measure, so that is an LGFA measure, so that's set on so the LGFA specify which components of revenue are included. So we haven't changed the LGFA specification. So what we're saying is when you look at your net surplus, so whether you've achieved a net operating surplus or deficit, that then we make those adjustments.
Oh, sorry, that happens down the bottom of the line, not the top there.
Yeah, and that's to bring the transparency.
But hang on, at the moment we do bring development levies into for the purposes of balancing the book. That we do bring development levies in.
Yep,
and you're suggesting that we should only bring in 35% of those.
That's right.
Into our revenue figure.
Yes.
When you're considering what is an appropriate balanced level to meet your ongoing costs, but for the calculation of the debt capacity, it's prescribed what the revenue item is.
Okay, so what is it?
It's all in, isn't it?
All DCs.
All DCs are in for the purpose, because that's described under the LGFA, saying
okay.
this is what your revenue is for that purpose.
All right, okay,
so
thank you.
Yes, it's acknowledging a sort of inconsistency in those two measures. One is setting, well, what's your debt capacity limit? The other, our revised approach, is saying, well, what do we think is an appropriate measure for your an operating profit or deficit, which means you are meeting your costs of running the city on a day-to-day basis.
So that's only in terms of determining whether or not we've run at a surplus or a deficit?
Correct.
Okay, it's not what we use in terms of...
Reporting, financial reporting of revenue, correct.
The denominator on that ratio.
Just to add a point, Councillor Mallett, it's this council's decision about where that debt to revenue target is set. The 200% is this council's decision. What PwC have highlighted is that the 230 is probably the maximum they would endorse, and it's the maximum that LGFA would recommend before they...
Which gives us headroom for disasters.
So PwC are not making any recommendations in that respect. They're just flagging what the maximum is that is reasonable. And it's this council to make that decision.
Thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Question, Andrew, about those 3 silo bins on your page 9, our page 88. Is it reasonable to assume, and of course this came up in the debate in the last topic around our asset management plans, that as they are improving in terms of staff use, as they're becoming more mature and we're getting good sound evidence out of them, that unfunded amount of 311 is going to continue to increase?
Yeah, so it has been flagged that it's more likely that it'll increase than decrease. I'm not sure where the current drafts are at, but...
Yeah, we haven't sort of got the totals, but some of those things that have been flagged to you through the business we're in are identifying items that are in the asset management plans, which would be over and above what is currently in the asset management plans.
Okay, and is that suggesting our assets are depreciating faster than, you know, in terms of their use and obsolescence and so forth, are deteriorating faster than what we're providing for in our financial accounts by way of depreciation?
I'm not sure I could kind of draw that conclusion, but I guess what I would say is that some of what you are seeing through those business we're in briefings, some of that will be items which were in part of that unfunded AMP component here, and some of it will be additional. I couldn't really make a comment on the depreciation aspect of that question.
Okay, and the second question, Andrew, is around city growth. You know, as the city grows, and you know, you've throughout the report indicated, and we have got some growth challenges ahead of us. The OPEX continues to grow, doesn't it, after the capital investment? So the asset management plans will be telling us that we have to fund even more by way of funds. So increasing our revenue, as you've calculated, by 11.7% may only be the start of future increases in revenue or future reductions in costs that we need to consider going forward.
Yes, yeah, I think that's accurate, and obviously the 2018 LTP will bring in the revised expenditure, and with that the team calculate the consequential OPEX which comes with those assets.
Yep.
So that number will come through, but then the increase that you'll get from growth in terms of rating base, whether that's a negative for a period of time before it starts to pay the consequential OPEX, I guess the modelling that the team will do will tell that story.
Do you have any thoughts about how this council might plan that going forward? I mean, we've had in the past, you know, back in 2012, there was a kind of a major, and I think the increase was about 9%? 8%, and then the 3.8 rolled over, you know, throughout the next over the next 2 10-year plans.
Yeah.
So going forward, you know, we're looking at another one of these, or potentially at another one of these major increases. And if we then fall back to our 3.8 or something that we think is going to be acceptable, do you think there's enough in what you guys have done for us here that we can review every year where we should be going, so that we have a regular handle on what those increases should be, rather than perhaps falling into these unfunded gaps?
I think, and Richard, jump in if I'm getting off track, but addressing the deficit is almost, we know that there's a large, the outlook for capital expenditure for both renewals and for growth is fairly large, so that's only a step, it's one step in addressing the future funding challenge. The 2018 10-year plan will look to firm up how big that challenge is, and then any rates increases above a break even So you may well decide that surpluses are needed to meet your future challenge, and increases beyond that point may be about inflation and then actually growth. And obviously that'll all be up for the team and for council to make that decision once you've got your revised information.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, and just on our new measurement, the measurement that you're recommending, which of course is different to the measurement for balancing our books that council's previously used,
Yep.
and is also different to the government-approved balancing books measure.
Yep.
Should we be reviewing, I mean, you know, I appreciate, and I know the basis behind your calculation, and it appears to me to be quite robust in terms of trying to match revenue with expenditure on a year-to-year basis so that we can say that we're living within our means. Going forward, should we be looking at this every year? I mean, I know there's a huge amount of confusion out there as to which measurement we use, and politically it's possible for individuals around this table to use different measures to give different, quite significantly different results. But I'm just kind of looking here to see how robust our new measure might be, and whether we need to look at that regularly to make sure that it still remains fit for purpose.
I think that it would be revisited when you revisit your financial strategy. So whether that be every 3 years during your LTP process or your 10-year plan process. But I mean, if you were in a period of low growth versus a period of high growth, and then if you look at your renewals and depreciation argument that we've talked about previously, Councillor Rob, that's where it's up to, I guess, to be aware of the implications of the decisions, whether you're fully funding the cost, the everyday costs to run the city. It really is determined by your growth, your capital expenditure requirements for growth and for renewals. So if you have that outlook, then you can make the decision on whether you want a break even or a surplus, or you're happy with the deficit.
I think the question Councillor Lobb was asking is the mathematical formula being the measure. Is that enduring? Yes, it is. So that is an enduring measure. What Andrew is responding to is that every 3 years you need to make a decision whether or not you're comfortable with your trajectory towards break even or your trajectory for surplus. And it may well be that we've had this discussion in terms of what assets do you fund and what assets do you not fund. It might well be that council makes a specific decision that they're comfortable to have lower surpluses for a period of time, then to ramp them up or so forth. So if we get that measure right, making the conversation around your rates levels, your cost levels, your debt levels is a lot easier, because we've now got a mechanically purer way of seeing the gap, and hopefully that's the one version of the truth, and then council can make a decision around that one version of the truth.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, moving on.
Thanks, Mayor Andrew. So look, I think we're at point 7 back on the summary page, which just comments there are a number of funding mechanisms, and as Richard's already mentioned, look, we haven't gone into those in great detail. We've mentioned some in this report, but there is the incorrectly named Revenue Task Force. I don't think I've got its full name, but that task force which is taking that forward. The final point is around Peacock, and look, from our analysis, it would say that Peacock would provide the capacity for the growth that is forecast, but we make the point that Peacock is a relatively expensive development and would require additional support from government, NZTA, etc. And obviously, you've already had the HIF announcement there, so the first stage of that is underway in terms of those other means of funding that development. There's probably a 9th point, which isn't on this page, which is just to reiterate, it kind of ties back to that first point, is that, the 2018 ICR work, all this feeding in, and consistent with what Richard has said, it's feeding into the various internal work streams that are underway for the 2018 10-year plan. So, yeah, look, Mayor Andrew, I wasn't proposing to turn any other pages unless people specifically request it, and really open it to questions if that's how you'd like to play it.
Okay, so are there any other questions anyone would like to ask? Okay, I'll move the report. Do we have a seconder? Councillor James. Okay, we move to debate. There is no debate, so we'll go to the vote. Okay, Councillor Rob.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Look, I'd just like to make, just to reiterate my earlier comment that I thought that we might have ended up with perhaps a little more detail in the motion around how we were going to use other aspects of this very good and detailed report. Apart from that, that will be picked up by the Financial Strategy and Revenue Task Force. But I do commend the fact that we now have a measure. It's not a silver bullet, but a measure that will help us around this table report whether or not this council is living within its means. And I think we should not be complacent with that one model, that it will be an answer to all issues, and one that we should be reviewing from time to time to make sure that it remains fit for purpose. It is clear from the PwC report that we do have challenges, although I cannot agree with Mayor Andrew that we will be expecting the bank manager to be turning up to foreclose on the council because of a serious financial situation that we have. And I think coming out of the report, there are some really good points. I think the business as usual. We have significant assets in the city, and we constantly find ways to defer those that are not important to certain elected members. And I think the pool and the Founders Theatre, which were considered in the last item, are good examples of that. And I think one of the outcomes from this report must surely be that we need to decide clearly on what assets council needs to retain, and then we need to make sure that we've got in place a solid way of ensuring that we have got funds that will meet the renewal of those assets. Because after having decided that we're going to retain the asset, whether it's the pool or a theatre or whatever, it shouldn't be a 10-year plan decision about spending on renewing assets that have simply worn out and have been depreciated. I think secondly too, in the PwC report, I think an outcome that I saw is that our 10-year plan and our planning process for this needs to be clear so that all competing projects can be considered and decided on. There'll always be ones that we as individual politicians win and lose on, and that's just a fact of life. Thirdly, coming out of this report is growth, and that to me appears to be our biggest single challenge. How do we fund it? Do we indeed fund it? Or do we let central government provide, or the entrepreneurs provide the funds to make it happen? Can we limit growth by not providing the infrastructure and simply saying to developers that if they want to open up residential or commercial business cells, then they should do all of the funding? And if we do, or whatever we do fund, how do we charge it back? And that's one of the major challenges for us. Do we charge it back to the developers, more to the developers because they cause the work to happen? Do we charge it to existing ratepayers on the basis that they benefit from some of that growth? Do we charge it to new ratepayers? Or do we consider some or all of it as intergenerational debt? Whatever we do, I think we need to start to develop some very clear objectives so that future councils will see why we made such decisions and the rationale behind these. It may mean that the city considers deficits as being acceptable to reflect intergenerational debt. But if that is acceptable to this council, it needs to be calculated and managed. Care needs to be taken that this is not a cost-plus exercise, and that the ratepayer foots the bill for any shortfalls that we have. And I have felt in some of our recent discussions around our 10-year plan that once we've decided on the costs, we're then going to find the appropriate rating level to cover the costs that we've done. And I don't think that's an acceptable way of developing the 10-year plan. We simply cannot rely on rates as the main source of income going forward. If you reflect back on central government, until the 80s, they relied pretty much on income tax, but found that income tax was not a reliable source of funding central government, and that was why in the 1980s GST was introduced. Nationally, our organisation needs to explore with central government options for alternative and fairer taxes that charge our services on a more more fairly to users rather than just to landowners. It was a pity at the LGA conference over the weekend that most of the discussion focused around microchipping cats and banning plastic bags, rather than looking at some of the bigger challenges around revenue for local government. So, you know, there's a real big issue here that isn't just belonging to this council, but belongs around the country. And, hey, it's election year, but I think we've missed the boat on that one. Thank you.
Just a point of order on accuracy. I didn't say that the bank manager would come knocking on council's door. I said that if this was my business, I could expect the bank manager to come knocking on my door, and that of course would be if I didn't have a business plan to trade out of it. So moving on to the next speaker, Councillor Ange.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. I respect the reasoning for commissioning this report. However, on this occasion I disagree, and that will come as no surprise to members around the table. I don't accept the direction that this report is taking us, and I certainly don't accept the measure as a given, as commented by PwC. I will always support staff getting the appropriate expert advice and expert reports. However, in this occasion, I am more than confident that our finance department and team could have answered any question in this report. So I've been asking myself why the need. Certainly the $180,000 cost, which works out at $3,000 a page, is pertinent and concerning to me given the tough financial times that we are in. I read the report and I came to the conclusion, looking desperately for some information that we haven't been discussing, some information that I didn't know, and unfortunately I didn't come upon anything. I don't understand the current thinking that was born from the 7th of March with taking the past budget, rearranging the deck chairs and then saying this is what it would look like. That just makes no sense to me. We should be focusing our energy, our time and certainly our ratepayers' money on the future budget and the challenges that face us and the future of our city. So for those reasons, I cannot support this recommendation.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you to PwC for the good report, and I really truly believe that it's an excellent and vital conversation starter for us to have with the public. The ratepayers now need to reflect and think very carefully about the use of debt funding going forward and how we use every dollar of their money and the debt capacity to build the city. I agree with Rob in respect to the ratepayers will have to face the question, what do they value right here, right now, and what do they want to fund, and what are they happy to leave for the new ratepayers to come in and fund? And that's not going to be an easy conversation to have. I agree the public need to understand why we need to spend money on growth, but also why we need to take action and repair and maintain our existing assets. And then, of course, a third thing they need to consider is how do we fund the lovely new stuff that we've got ahead of us, the zoo plan, the river plan, and many other good things, the cycleways, Dave, all of those lovely new things. When I was at the local government conference, apart from I agree with Rob entirely about the tenure of the AGM, the actual conference itself had a number of good speakers amongst the mix, and their focus was very much on cities' future is on building livability. They absolutely said that the best cities have livable spaces. And livable spaces does not vast swathes of community, vast subdivisions full of houses alone, not alone. Livable spaces are good quality social and community infrastructure. And that, as PwC have pointed out with the many graphs and bar charts and things is where the gap exists. So we don't need to put our head in the sand about this. We have to face up to the public and talk about why that is the case and what we're going to collectively do about it.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Yes, thank you to the writers of this report. This is very, very useful, and I think it will underscore the very grave challenges facing this city and other growth cities in New Zealand and Australasia. I think our top quality comms department are going to have a lot of work to do to start engaging the public around the challenges that face this council. We are obviously going to have to make some tough choices, and various plans are just that. They are but various plans, and we're going to have to obviously engage in a number of trade-offs. And I think, in my view, Councillor Pascoe gave a very good address in that he obviously chipped local government New Zealand. The big issue is not the microchipping of the cats or the plastic bags. That should be a national issue anyway. It is about how local government in New Zealand raises funds and what are the funding mechanisms. And he's totally correct that we have to revamp our engagement with central government as to how local government provides those crucial services. I do, however, want to take a minor issue, and I want to assure councillors that I deeply care personally about the pool and the wonderful vision of Mike Minogue and Dennis Rogers Mayoralties in creating the pool. I was around when they built the thing. And the wonderful vision of the Dennis Rogers Mayoralty and the creation of the Founders Theatre and our library services. Now, there's some talk that somehow the theatre's gone and it's closed and we've lost the Founders. Well, actually, no, we're replacing the Founders, and we have committed a quantum of money to relocate the Founders Mark II, a new version of a theatre. We are obviously engaged and will be engaged in debate as to how we refurbish and keep going the major pool complex. We're obviously in a debate about how we will refurbish and keep going our library service, bearing in mind that we have a whole set of earthquake regulations and awareness that perhaps was not there 10 years ago, bearing in mind that all major facilities have a life history, and all major facilities at some stage require a close down and a major refurb after 50 or 60 years or so. And the other grave challenge that we face in terms of this report is that we are a city with a very relatively limited rating base, and yet we're being asked to provide regional facilities. And that's also the big challenge of who's going to join with us in paying for the operation of those regional facilities, such as the regional swimming pool and the regional theatre. And one of the aspects, and it won't raise much, is I do think we are moving rapidly towards some form of Hamilton card. Well, we're going to have to face the prospect of possibly down the track of the theme gardens requiring some entry fee. If you're a Hamilton resident, you have your Hamilton card. If you're a Hamilton resident, you have your card that gives you a discount to go into the swimming pool. If you live in Tamahiri, you're going to start paying more because you use the facilities that the rest of us pay for, but you actually use it at the same price. I don't get that. Logically, if I'm subsidising a zoo or a pool or whatever... No, I thank you. I will come right back on topic, Councillor Mallett. No.
Okay, keep going. Stop. Keep going, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Mallett, I think I'm being very supportive of you and that this is a very important document, and I think I'm being very supportive of your view, which I suspect I'm going to hear in a minute, is we have some really crunch decisions to make, and that we have a whole lot of plans where we're going to have to make some tough choices. Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you very much. This report is not on any specific project or any particular initiative that the council is going to do. All it is how do we measure our financial status? That's all this report is trying to do. It does that by looking at our current 10-year plan, and then tells us that there's a whole lot of stuff that you've made decisions on which haven't been reported into a 10-year plan but will become into a 10-year plan. So I'm sorry, but I think the focus of much of the debate today has been people perhaps trying to advocate for a project, or they don't want a project to go ahead, or they do want a project to go ahead. The report has got nothing to do with that. It's all to do about what the impact of any particular, or overall, what the impact of the projects that we've already got on the books and the projects that might be coming up into the books, and how we fund those things are, and how we measure the impact of any particular decision we make. So, talk of cycleways and plastic bags and cats and things like that is totally irrelevant. This is a big picture reporting information to council to guide future decisions report, not a effort to try and promote any or reject any particular project. So in that respect, I will be supporting it. I can't think of any reason, unless you have a genuine concern with the recommendation put to us and on how we record these things, how we measure these things. That's the sort of things you should be turning your mind to, not whether it means my project's in or a particular project I like or a particular project I don't like is in, because that's not what we're discussing at all. All we're trying to say is, if you do this, your debt goes up, your revenue goes down, da-da-da. So, and I do think this is a more accurate, more realistic view of our report, of what we're doing than what we are currently doing. So I will be supporting the recommendation.
Any other speakers? I'll just speak to this. We have a very good chief executive. He's a chartered accountant. He's got 10 years experience as auditor for the government in Audit New Zealand. He has 10 years commercial accounting experience with Fonterra, and we're very lucky to have him as coming from chief financial officer in this council to the chief executive. And under Richard is an extremely good financial team who works with him. The current, so what's happened is 6 months ago, around about 6 months ago, a chief executive presented us with the position that this council was in at the time. And the chief executive did all he did with his team to present this to us, but we didn't accept what he said, and he had no choice then but to go out and engage one of the best teams in New Zealand to come back and give a report to back up where he'd already got to at a cost of $180,000.
Don't say that. I'll get another invoice if you're not careful. Calm down.
No, I just want to point out that it doesn't matter how we report. The reporting isn't the issue here. It doesn't matter if we report with the existing measure, if we report with the PwC proposed measure, or if we report using the government measure. Either way, it doesn't change the outcome. We still have a net operating deficit of $12.1 million. It doesn't change that depending on which way we report. Okay, so it's the model is one thing. The model makes us aware of it, but either way, no matter which one of those three options we go with, we're still trading at a $12.1 million deficit. So as members, we actually need to accept what we're being presented with today. And to reject what we're being presented with today is, I just don't know what else could be done to convince members otherwise. So we and as we can see with the $12.1 million shortfall with the decisions we make on spending and how we run this city, there is a financial ramification that does need to go with every decision we make. There is a fallout. And that's what this is about. This is about actually making us responsible as we go into the 10-year plan, as having a full understanding of the serious position that this city's in financially. So we'll go to the board to vote on this one. Okay,
Motion is carried, 11 for, 1 against.
So thank you, Justin and Andrew, and Brent. He hasn't seen a word, but thanks for coming to support. And Andrew and Justin, you've done a lot of work on this. You obviously have a really good understanding of the whole thing, and I can understand the cost of the report being where it is because there's a huge amount of knowledge that's been pulled into this report. So I just want to thank you very much for all the work you've done in bringing this report to us. So we'll break now for morning tea until 10 to 12. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. At the 11th of April Finance Committee, the chairperson of the Vibrant Hamilton Trust, Thomas Gibbons, presented the Trust's draft statement of intent, and he also responded to questions about the future of the Trust. And following the resolution of that meeting, that staff would report back to the Council on the future of the Trust, we have a report today that outlines 4 options that the Vibrant Hamilton Trust has been considering. And the Trust have noted a primary interest in option number 2 in the report, which is direct funding towards a key project or several key projects. So this report today is intended to provide detail on what the Trust has been considering, and it also provides an opportunity today for the Council to provide a preference to the Trust. So today's any decision is not a binding decision on the future of the Vibrant Hamilton Trust, but an opportunity to provide feedback. And this feedback through a resolution would be relayed to the Vibrant Hamilton Trust at their August meeting. So we're happy to answer any questions about the report.
Thank you, Councillor Ange.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. You've just answered one question already, Nick, which is around whether it was binding or not. I'm just a little bit confused. The preferred option, correct me if I'm wrong, the preferred option is option 2. Did I read that in the report? Yeah. So does that at all hamper, when you look on page 145 under point 12, the objectives of the Vibrant Hamilton Trust are, and there's 4 bullet points there, and one of them is to relieve poverty through sustainable policies and practices. So if we provide the Trust with direction, for example, option 2, does that put them in any difficulty? Because I'm assuming those objectives are in their deed of trust or statement of intent?
That's correct.
So does that put them in any conflict of those?
If there was direct funding towards one of those key projects, it would still have to meet the criteria listed at the top there in their trust deed. So it doesn't need to meet all of the 4 points, but it will need to address one of those points.
Okay. So all you're asking us, or all the Trust is asking us to do, is send a message of this would be this council of the day's preference.
That's correct.
Okay, and it's non-binding. And in terms of option 2, they would then, what we would be saying is our preference would be these particular plans if they were going to go down that track.
At this stage, through their discussions, they have indicated a preference for supporting the regional theatre and the ongoing development of Hamilton Gardens.
Okay.
So that the council could provide, through resolution, a suggestion of looking into other projects beyond that, but at this stage, that is the 2 that the Trust has focused on as primary interest.
Okay, and when do they spend their money?
For option 2, this is an option that is actually it'd be allocating funding beyond the current agreement, so there would need to be an amendment to the trust deed. So if there was a decision to look at option 2, it would fall outside its current annual process of allocating funds.
So why is that? Is that because I was a little bit confused around what we were being asked. Are we sort of indicating with whichever preference we go for to spend the entirety of the funds in the trust? Is that is what you're asking us to do?
That is what option 2, that is what it's referring to allocate funds towards several key projects. And that would be beyond the, at the moment, where, I'll just see if I can get the exact.
So option 2 is about allocating all of the existing trust funds, which would potentially lead to a dissolution of the trust, and that would require the consent of council. Right. Not asking for that decision, obviously, to be made today, but to get a steer on that, around this council's
feeling on that or other options, and then the trust would put a report together and bring that back at a later date.
And that report would include then their preference among those projects that are listed, or some other strategic project that they feel is important for the city.
Correct, and if it was option 2, that would therefore require, they'd be seeking consent to dissolve the trust.
And we can dissolve the trust at any time?
It will need to be a decision of the trust, but it requires the consent of council.
Right,
so
okay.
the trust deed outlines a process where they will need to resolve that. There will need to be consent of the council, and then there is a decision, a follow-up decision at a following trust meeting. So it is not a decision of this council, but the trust would require the consent of this council to dissolve.
Okay, so thank you for that. Mayor Andrew, when you're ready, I'll indicate I'll move option 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Mallows.
Asked every question I was.
Thank you. Councillor Robb.
Thank you. I think one of my questions has been partly answered, but I will ask it again. But the first question I wanted to ask is, where did in paragraph 10 you talk about the Waikato Foundation Trust, which was the precursor to the Vibrant Trust. Where did the funds come from that were in the Waikato Foundation Trust that flowed through to the Vibrant Trust? You know, obviously the capital fund came from somewhere, not from rates, I assume.
No, not from rates. I'm sorry, I don't have the information on the establishment of the Waikato Foundation Trust.
It was the well shares. It was the well shares, yes.
Okay. Okay. So that was the shares that collectively the councils around the region owned, was it?
Yeah, so it came, it's the well network geographical area.
Yep.
Shares came back, and effectively Waikato, Hamilton, Waipa was put into Waikato Foundation Trust, and then basically on the it was decided there was a better way to leverage that, and each council was then given the opportunity to take that money and invest it in a way aligned with the charitable purposes of that trust. We decided to put the Waikato Foundation Trust portion of Hamilton City Council into Vibrant Hamilton Trust.
Okay. All right, I think I understand that. Now, the other question that I had, which I think may have been answered, but right throughout the report you refer to the trust's funds. Do you mean the capital fund or the income fund? Because trusts have a capital fund, which I assume from, if I've got the answer to the questions, you're talking about as trust funds, the total capital fund, which would be effectively diverted somewhere, transferred somewhere else, and the trust would wind up. Is that
correct?
What you mean by the words trust fund?
Yes, correct.
Okay. I just think it needs to be a little bit clearer if it comes back that we're talking about the capital fund of the trust.
Yes, that's good feedback. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Paula.
Mayor Andrew, just a couple of questions. Some of them have already been answered, so I won't go there. It would have helped me to get an idea of what it's been spent on in the past. There's no detail here. Can you give me some indication?
So in recent years, it's been allocated on generally an annual basis. So with the external funding subcommittee that was set up at that time, projects would come through there. So we'd would basically apply to the Vibrant Hamilton Trust for largely council projects such as funded Hamilton Gardens, playgrounds on an annual basis, usually between 80 to 300,000 a year.
80
so 300,000 a year is the general allocation amount. So that's the income on funds that they allocate.
Crikey. Okay, so that just brings up another question then. Just remind me what's in the community grant scheme. How much money?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, in total that includes I think it is about 1.2 and close for the single and the multi-year, but I just can't recall
Small
this
cell
right
grants
now.
is quite small, isn't it, Martin? Can anybody remember the quantum of the small scale?
I think it's 290, but
yeah. 250, 260, I was thinking, but maybe you're right.
Yeah, sorry.
You probably are.
I can find out
Okay.
for a while.
No, I just wanted to know that. It helps me. In your opinion, as the staff that work closely with the community, where would you sit? Because I'll just to say where I'm coming from, I'm trying to weigh out between supporting option 2 and supporting option 3 in terms of where do we get the best bang for our buck, where's the biggest community need. I'm not trying to put you on the spot and ask you to pick winners, because that would be unfair. That's our job to decide where it goes. But in terms of those the areas, where is the greatest need in our community? I tell you what, I have to say that the 12, the criteria is so broad it could just about fund anything. And number 12 on the page, top of page 145.
Yes,
so I don't find those criteria or objectives the least bit useful. But when you break down to the options, there's some good things going on. I would like to know, for example, or another question is, my final question on that is, would, if it directed money towards key projects, and given that we all understand today we can't fund everything, would that be over and above the council's own commitment, or would that be a way of replacing or...
It wouldn't be a way of replacing.
So if it went to the
Can
regional...
I correct you on that? So we've made it very clear to Momentum that given the nature of, so let's use the theatre, given the nature of the theatre and the funding opportunities, we've said that basically the Vibrant Hamilton Trust Fund can only be used for plans and strategies that are aligned with Hamilton City Council's key projects.
Yeah.
Any contribution that comes out of that will go against council's contribution to the theatre. As an
Right.
example.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were asking about...
As an example, if that was the direction. Council could make it a decision, but it's their decision to make if they want to make a contribution towards Momentum's contribution towards the theatre, but I wouldn't be recommending that.
No, but I think it's still quite good to be transparent about that and say, well, if we spent 100,000 on out of that fund on the theatre next year, that would come out of our 30 million contribution. It would. That's what you're saying.
Yes, because it's at the direction of our plans and strategies that where that
No, I
money
get
gets
that,
invested.
but
So that's
just
why.
the simple
yes,
question
the
is
answer
yes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Paula.
No, so that's fine. Just wanted to check whether that was an over and above or inclusive of other funding streams. I've got that in my head now. So the last question, going back to the whole thing, because I sat through the small community grants this year for the first time, and Martin's got considerable experience. I had a lot of feedback and chat after that. My question is, would the community derive greater benefit, given that that's so oversubscribed? It's really, and we were getting down to splitting dollars between worthy groups because of the quantum of it. Would it add significant value if it went into that more diffuse spend versus the strategic big project spend? Because I can't make my mind up just yet.
I really don't think it's my role to give my opinion on that. I think what you're talking about, though, and that whatever that amount, that pool amount is, that issue is always going to exist in terms of what the spread is. So, this isn't going to change that issue.
Yeah. So it's fair to say, Richard, isn't it, that because it's such a small quantum, it won't make a massive difference to those huge projects.
Can I
make a difference to
add
small projects?
Could I add two things to this? So firstly, this originally came from a challenge from some of the external members of Vibrant Hamilton Trust who believe that they can make bigger impact by using the fund for a bigger project rather than spreading it up over little things, because the nature of the trust deed requires them to spend them on effectively council unfunded projects. So basically it's effectively a way through they can't put out to external parties. They can't. The Vibrant Hamilton Trust can't make grants to third parties. Yeah. They can only make grants to items that are actually within our strategic plan, so i.e. council facilitated projects.
Okay, so I get that, but did they understand in making that decision that this would replace other council streams?
They're aware of that, so that's where they were aware of, but that's originally where it came from, was they believed there was an opportunity, and that's what originally drove this, going way back, and it was not in this term, it was last term. The trust members basically said that, frittering away a little bit here and there. I didn't use the word frittering, they did some very good things with it. I stand corrected, they did some very good things with it. They believe they could do even more so by making a single large contribution to a significant, iconic, and they see the theatre and the gardens as iconic, and want to go down that track. Okay,
so thank you, and just to flag that at some stage then, if this motion is successful, I would like to know how those projects are going to be decided upon against each other, because there's quite a few different things there: river plan, biking plan, zoo plan, destination playgrounds, Hamilton Gardens, theatre. That's 6 things. How are we going to manage how we split up a very small sum, 300k, didn't you say? 300?
It's five.
Yep.
5.5 million.
5 million. So that
No.
300k is just the income on the funds, the actual capital
And that's what
fund.
you allocate every year, isn't it?
300k
Yeah.
up to.
Yeah.
That's correct. Yeah.
So the option two is to put $6 million against two of those projects, being the theatre and Hamilton Gardens,
Okay, cool.
or other.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. Everything's up to the trust. Yep.
And that's my point, I think, Angela, was just how does that get decided? And yeah, that's all. Thank you very much.
Councillor Jeff.
Yeah, I think Paula nailed what I was after there. So hypothetically, we could say 5.9 million, we'd love to see that allocated as part of our share for the theatre. What powers do we have if we were to say, look, we'd like to get our hands on the money, thanks. Good job, thank you very much for what you've done, but we'll take the 5.9 million now and we'd like to decide what to do with it.
I think that's the question for Richard.
It'll be depending on how they tag it, so there'll be some form of obligation they'll tag it. But ultimately, if you look at the grand old maths scenario, if we get $5.9 million cash in against the theatre, that means we have less burden against the theatre, which means it offsets when we put it other ways. So ultimately, that's what they're doing.
Yep, cool. And they're obviously looking for direction from us for one or two projects. Are we looking at actually specifying one or two projects today, or are we just basically looking at saying, look, funding, the option 2 looks good to most of us, and we're going to come back to you and do a bit more thinking, or what's the...
I'll hand back to
What are their expectations?
Yes, they've stated what their preference is here. So their preference is to allocate the full amount and potentially split that between the theatre and Hamilton Gardens. They are interested in hearing if there is a different preference from you, or if you're in support of them exploring that further.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you. So options 1, 2, 3 and 4, you said that option 2 would result in ultimately the dissolution of the trust. Which other ones would ultimately end in the dissolution of the trust, and which ones would keep it going? I.e., which ones would wring the golden goose's neck?
At this stage, all of the options that are being looked into are ones that there would be no longer a need for the trust if there was a disbursement of funds. So option 1, transferring to another charitable organisation, or into a council community grant scheme, or to be distributed through a special funding round, all would result in
the trust going.
And then, well, it would be set up with no funds there. So all would result in disestablishing.
Okay.
So there is another option, which is to continue.
Yeah. So the options you presented as 1, 2, 3 and 4 all end up with the dissolution of the Vibrant Hamilton Trust in its current form. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Dave.
Yeah, thanks. Just looking at your bullet points under 12, the second bullet point, relieve poverty through sustainable policies and practices. Can you tell me whether there have ever been any grants that directed towards relieving poverty? I don't recall any, but and whether any of the ones listed, for instance, under option 2 would do that?
I don't recall any. In saying that, it depends on, how broad you take that view around relieving poverty or the impacts of poverty. So certainly, I would say personally that playgrounds, for instance, where some of the funding has gone, provide an accessible resource to all communities. So
But they were destination programs, not local neighbourhood ones, weren't they?
Yep, correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the grand piano for the Founders Theatre wouldn't have been relieving poverty?
No. But I would say that would be the closest one.
Poverty of spirit, Gary says. That's a good answer, Gary. So, yeah, okay, that's what I thought. And the decision on the projects under option 2 would be entirely made by that committee. I know you touched on that with Paula's question. So, those funds couldn't be given to council to decide which projects? Sort of an option 2B or something like that?
They have indicated they want your preference today. So if you wanted to state today that actually these are the projects, or that...
No, I was talking about the actual process.
Right.
Here's 5 whatever million, you decide which of the, the projects, these and others, that you want to put it to, because that's not listed as such as an option, but it could be a variation on 2.
We could request that. I think what the Trust is trying to do is trying to honour as best as it can the principles of the Trust by labelling the fund it distributes against its objectives. So there's going to have to be a change to the Trust deed to enable them to do it, because at the moment they can only distribute up to their income they've earned, or up to 10% of the principal. For them to do this, they're going to have to change their Trust deed to distribute the entire amount. Then after that they dissolve. So they'll probably be trying to honour as much of the Trust deed as they can. Yep. If we make a request that we want the money to come to us, they'll probably have to make a further change to the Trust deed to enable them to do that. It's not out of the question, I'm just saying we have to be very clear about what we want them to do.
So if it was just us, like Helen suggested, giving them some ideas or influencing which of those projects they chose, do we have to do that today? So there's further time before?
No, I think, yes, there is time, and like there's no urgency to is my understanding. Obviously, if it fits into the, if there was a decision to put it towards major projects and that fitted into the 10-year plan considerations, that would be useful. So certainly we could take back that that you're interested in the projects, but you want to do some more thinking around that, or
have the LTP discussions and see where we thought it would help most, for instance.
Yes, that's my understanding, Richard. That
Yep.
would be
Ultimately, the Trust will just continue in perpetuity, doing what they're doing until we send them a clear message, and we've got to give them our consent anyway. So until we give them consent to dissolve, they'll just carry on. So there's no huge time pressure, but there are some. I think timing-wise, around the 10-year plan does make a lot of sense, Councillor Dave. There is a lot of stuff on our platter that we've got to think about how we fund.
Okay. And when the share was of the foundation trust, or whatever it was called, was given to Waikato District and Waipa, they didn't set up a trust like this, did they, from memory?
Waikato District Council did, so they still have their. I'm not sure what it's called. The Waikato.
A trust was established, but it was as a more of a wider contestable fund.
So a bit like our community grants sort of thing.
Yes, it is a separate trust, but it is more about allocating directly to community groups.
Okay, and Waipa just grabbed the money and ran, did they? Wasn't much.
Yes, it wasn't used to establish a trust like the other two
They used it
councils.
for specific purposes, however. It wasn't like they just absorbed it into their bottom line. They actually had, at the time, I believe, a council decision was made about how they chose to use the fund. I can't remember what it was for, either Don Rollins Centre or their indoor or their swimming pool. I can't recall which one.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Siggy.
Thank you so much. It wasn't sort of obvious to me that all this was basically, all the 4 options were basically about dissolving the trust or liquidating the trust. So, so for us really it's the decision whether we want to use it for the bigger projects or whether we want to keep it going. Is that right? Or who made the decision that they actually want to liquidate it? Where did they come out from?
The status quo would be to continue as it currently is, and as the Chief Executive said, it would operate that way unless there was a decision otherwise. Sorry, are you able to repeat just the first part of your question there?
Yeah, I just wondered who made the decision of liquidating it. I mean, or did that just come up because of the big projects we're having now, that this would be a possibility to use for the bigger projects? Is that what had happened?
That there's just a feeling amongst the trust at the moment that they could get a big bang out of the bucks if they were to allocate it, but if the full amount, if they were to do that, it would lead to dissolution of the trust.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure that in making that decision that they were considering other options as well.
Okay.
Just to do their due diligence basically, and to make sure that Council had the opportunity to be aware that there were other options as well, but this is their stated preference. Yes. So, and as stated before, they wouldn't be able to liquidate without, it does require council's consent. So no decision would be made without it coming back to council.
Thanks for the clarification. Thank you.
Councillor Ange.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Is there, Dave raises a good point. Is there a way, perhaps advice from the CE, is there a way to, because I would actually like to see what the trust is, you know, what their preference would be for one or two projects. I know there is a list here, but it would be pretty hard today to sit here and say it needs to be the river plan or it needs to be the gardens without that conversation around funding challenges and stuff. So, and you know, of course, gardens and zoo plan and all of them would be a great money grab for me, but I won't be doing that. Absolutely
Can
not.
I just butt in for a minute? Helen, could you just explain what the trust actually, what their preferences are?
So paragraph 18, they have actually stated, they did actually state in their meeting, so this is the minutes of their meeting, that's all right, that their preference is for the regional theatre and the ongoing development of the Hamilton Gardens.
Okay. But just, Richard, could you respond perhaps with an idea on how to encapsulate the issue that Dave has raised without delaying anything? What would be the best way forward to do that?
So, I mean, delays not a concern, sorry. Delays not a concern because this is like I said, they can continue on, but the 10-year plan's providing some catalyst. That option would be that we basically don't agree with the projects under option 2, that we spend some time amongst ourselves to determine which projects we wish them to invest in and give them very specific instruction about our views for them to consider. So I take this to a briefing whereby, or another council meeting whereby we debate what we're talking about and what percentages we want to each of those projects, and then provide that as our feedback to the trust, and then they can respond accordingly. They don't have to listen to it.
No.
But that would be the way to achieve that.
We do have a discussion on strategic plans at the 22nd of August briefing. That could be an appropriate time to, because it will cover off a list, you know, a number of key plans at that meeting. So could have further discussion at that point.
I guess I'm seeking what the majority of council actually wants to do here, rather than pushing up an option at this point in time. I don't know.
We'd be happy to take back to the Vibrant. Well, I mean, I actually think they would be open to that. So I think we could go back to the Vibrant Hamilton Trust and talk to them about aligning this with the 10-year plan. And at that point, through the 10-year plan discussions, we come back to them with our preference at that time, and then they could base their decision or process through that. In that way.
Dave, just to make it a bit easier here, are you comfortable with Ange putting up option 2, which she'd proposed, or would you like to do a hybrid on that?
No, I don't want to alter that, because I think under that we can probably, it's my check with the Chief Executive, we can probably get LTP discussions that lead into that final decision. Is that?
And all we could do is just receive the report today, full stop.
Yeah.
And then that means they can't progress and do anything. And then we can just notify them that council wishes to spend a bit more time considering the options. We can then have a discussion and give that option at a later date. And
I wasn't so much about which option, it was more about which project.
No, what I'm saying, options project. So I just think we receive the report today, full stop, and then we just, through our 10-year plan process that Helen's suggesting, is we just have a discussion and focus our projects down so we can give very clear instruction to the trust.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm after, that process, but Angela's moved option 2, haven't you, Angela?
No one seconded it, so we're fine.
Well, yeah. But what Dave just said is that option 2 still does actually allow us to have that project discussion, which is really important, and I don't... I'm really respectful of each individual elected member's wish lists in terms of those strategic plans. So this doesn't stop, as Dave just pointed out, this doesn't stop this just sends an early indication, and then when we, Helen, when we have that plans, we can nut it all out there, and then we can come back and give them direction.
Yep.
So could there be a C that says that we will
Yeah.
speak with the trust and come back
With
with
preference? Or
with preferences for projects following 10-year plan discussions?
Okay. And
That's my advice.
So maybe today we just receive the report and don't give any feedback, because the trust will wait until we do give feedback. They're not going to go ahead. So because we haven't given an option, and as we're leading into the 10-year plan, that gives us the opportunity to go back to them at that stage.
yeah, I'm still, Mary and Jo, I'm still comfortable with the discussion and the questions that we've just had to move ahead with this, but adding a little bit in the aura in there. Yep, it's going on. It's being wordsmithed.
Actually,
What this motion would do is give them an indication that
Yeah.
council supports option 2 in principle and wants to come back with more direction around the actual projects to be supported.
So Richard, does that give them enough of, the C give them enough of a steer to sort of hold the,
Yep, that will.
Yep.
I mean, it's basically all you're doing is saying, hey, we like the idea of putting in a couple of projects, hold your horses while we think about what those projects are.
great, thank
Yep.
you.
Are you happy with that wording?
Yes, thank you.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Jeff. Okay, so we'll move to questions. We've had, and straight into debate, so we start with Councillor O'Leary.
Hang on.
It's just gone, but Angela moved, so she gets first right to speak.
I think it's got a question at this point.
Oh, sorry, we're still in questions.
Yeah, sorry. Look, just, I was on the CCO, chairman of the CCO subcommittee last term, and on the chairman of the finance committee now. So this entity is always reported to those two committees. And just, am I right in putting some context around it that we, the city council, appoints every trustee? That's correct.
That is correct.
Yes.
Yes.
And during the last term, the trust was very, very fastidious, in fact, about getting our approval for projects. So they wrote letters to us, please give us your idea. So members be very sure that the trust, and the wording might not be right, is very much a creature of the Hamilton City Council. That they very much look to the City Council to give it guidance as with regards to where it spends its money. So this would totally fit in with that. Oh. And I assume Thomas and those sort of guys have someone spoken to them or something, and they
Yes,
have come. They're comfortable with
Yep.
getting shot of the thing. Yeah.
They're comfortable with that, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so we're into debate now, and there's no one on the board. Or Ange, did you want to speak?
Look, just briefly, I think when we look at the $300,000 a year, it is a little rats and mice in supporting things for the city, and I think the conversation of making a real strategic impact has been sort of floating around the table for some time, so I hope that everybody supports the motion.
Okay, Councillor Jeff.
Yep, very quickly also. Look, I applaud the Trust for its direction on this. And I think there's a saying, I know there's a saying, don't look a gift horse in the mouth. And to me, this is very much a gift horse, given the financial difficulties that this council faces, or the challenges we face. The opportunity to spend, or to have $5.9 million, which we won't have to borrow or find elsewhere, at our disposal. linked, possibly, we'll talk about the projects later, obviously, but I just think it's a very good opportunity, and we'd be crazy not to take it.
Councillor Mark.
I have a strong feeling I'm going to lose this, but I'm going to go down swinging. There's a fine line between a gift horse and a goose that lays the golden egg. Just to take out my good friend Jeff Taylor's point there, but this is not a new debate. In 13 years on the Well Energy Trust, we had very similar debates. Do we go for the small community grants, or do we go for the big projects, etc.? And always the temptation was to wind up the trust and go for the big impact grant and leave monster legacies. And I don't say this lightly, because I'm fully aware of the implications of not using it to its full extent this once. But I would draw the Council's attention to the fact that we actually submitted to the Well Energy Trust that we preferred the small community grants. Now, I'm not saying this is a small community grants round, but the size of the projects that Helen has talked about there are between 80 and 300 Ks. Now, those size grants hold a unique position in the philanthropic or the donation area in Hamilton. Now, that'll be gone. That'll be gone. Yep, we'll get a $5 million relief, but that 300K potentially per year will be gone. Now, bear in mind, if you take this to the next level, not only are we strongly hinting that there may be a great whacking rates rise, we're about to take this 300 grand a year out of the hands of that same community we're hitting them with rates with. It is a golden goose that lays the golden egg, and we're just about to feed them goose. And it worries me. I won't be supporting this at all. I would rather see it somehow stay the same and then turn into a community grant scheme, because the other thing about Hamilton and the Waikato is we're a new community. We don't have the old money that the Dunedins, Wellingtons and Aucklands have, and therefore there is major strain on the D.V. Bryant Trusts, the Well Energy Trusts, the Trust Waikato's and everybody, and we're just pulling another one out of the mix. So I won't be supporting this because to take the quick relief, because ultimately the people who would be losing out can least afford to lose out.
Councillor Paula.
Thank you. I probably support the motion, but I have to say I'm going to speak in support of many of the sentiments that Mark has just expressed, because I do, and that's why I said at the beginning, I was just struggling with the fact that a little bit goes a long way with some of our community groups. I've seen that first hand. There would be a lot of things that are many community-related groups couldn't do if they didn't receive regular small amounts from councils and other funders. I think that's fair to say. I personally have some concerns that the amount we put into those things is so low as to be almost, it's just, and they're oversubscribed. I mean, I sat through the funding round, and we were splitting small amounts between worthy applicants in the end to give them something to go away and try and finish their project with. That's the truth of that. So I do feel for them, and I suppose if the trust itself hadn't given us strong direction, I would be saying, well, you know, why can't we keep it in an option that delivers amounts every year and feeds it out? We do focus on the very big strategic projects, and we must, but the small and useful projects sometimes get overlooked. They really do.
Councillor Gary.
Thanks. I am fully aware that you can only spend the dollar once. It can either be for little grants or it can be for something big. And we, you know, some of us around the table need to just realign ourselves with reality and understand that. I think that the suggestion is that this will go some way towards the regional theatre, perhaps towards the gardens, perhaps river plans. Projects which I may or may not be supportive of, but that's not the point of this debate. The debate is what is the best use of that funding, and I think that the best use of that funding, if it is going to come to that, will be to support those big projects, because the council has to support those somehow, either through ratepayers, either through debt, or in this situation we found a golden goose, which I think we might find we're wringing its neck, and then that at least parry some of the debt and some of the pressure on the ratepayers. If we, and because what we're talking about, I mean, you know, we can either spend it on little community groups, which are great and fantastic, or we can either spend it on the theatre, but we can't spend it twice. It has to go to one or the other, and you have to make that decision, and you have to be brave enough to say that you've made that decision rather than pretending that it can be spent twice.
I just want to point out that I am on the Vibrant Hamilton Trust. I'm not conflicted, and all the proceeds are for the benefit of Hamilton City. So, just to point that out. Ange, did you want to write a reply? Okay, we'll just go to the we'll go to the board on this one.
The motion is carried, 10 for, 1 against.
Okay, we'll stop for lunch now until 1:15. Thank you.